So, welcome to Slay Your Dragons with Compassion, my podcast done in conjunction with the wonderful online events. And this is a place where we explore what's happened to people in their lives. Normally, what's been the place where their lives have changed? What have they had to embrace in order to become who they are? And what's their life experience? And people have often said it's much, it's truth is much stranger than fiction. If we hear some people's lives, we would never believe what goes on in them. So thank you for listening to our podcasts. And this is now, I think, number 13 that we've been recording. And today I'm very, very pleased to welcome my guest, Stephen Kirk. And Stephen has had somewhat of a rich life, and hopefully he's going to share some of the ingredients of that and what's made him what he is. So Stephen, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you. And we've talked a bit about your life story and the things that have gone on in your life. And I think some of what I'm really impressed with is one, you've been through some being a big shot businessman with lots of experience. You've had some quite strong psychic and mystical experiences. You found yourself in what I see as one of the most beautiful relationships I've seen in my life. And you've also encountered serious illness, which you've also dealt with your typical style. And so I'd like to unwrap some of those and take a look at what you'd like to share. There's also a story of spying. Would that be a fair word, or are we?
The story evolves around the theory that somehow I, completely unknown to myself, was involved in some espionage activities. But to this day, I will never be able to prove that one way or the other.
Extraordinary, yeah. So, well, you've also had deep engagement with the Murdochs, Rupert and Elizabeth Murdoch, and again, we're not going to go into that in depth, but you've travelled quite a distance in your life. So, tell us a little bit about how you started off and what took you into some of these places.
Okay, so it's probably best to start off about 10 miles away in Stamford Hill in Haringey, which I always pretend is Hackney because it sounds more funky, but it was in 100 yards from the borough of Hackney. My background, which really did start me off, was that I was born into a traditional Jewish, not religious, but observant family. And within that, there were various rules that were inflicted upon me and the family about who I could be friends with and who I could marry and so on and so forth. My mother was all my younger life until about the age of 24. She had manic depression and was in and out of mental hospitals. And also, and this is in terms of what made me think something strange was going on in my life, is that when the group Fairport Convention started, I suddenly found myself in love with English folk music. And wrapping that all together, my father was very concerned I should never marry a non-Jewish woman. And that he didn't talk to his sister for most of their lives together because she became a Jehovah's Witness, which is another story. But the point being that when my grandmother on my mother's side was dying, she confessed that actually she was the daughter of a Jewish Christian marriage. So actually, in technical terms, she wasn't Jewish. And this was deeply, deeply upsetting to my father and probably led in the end to my mother's suicide because she, shortly after that, she committed suicide. And anyway, so that was one part, which is that when I saw my mother in one of her many hospital visits, she'd had electroconvulsive therapy. And when I went to see her, it was like a different person. She was free-spirited. And she said to me, there's a nice Thai nurse. Maybe you'd like to ask her out. And I said, Mom, it's not Jewish. She said, oh, no, it doesn't. And so I saw for the brief period the electroconvulsive therapy worked a different personality. And I then put it all together. Why do I like English folk music? Because I have got some non-Jewish blood in me, which like at the time was, wow, that's amazing. And why is my mother ill? And I thought it has to do something to do with the fact that she's a vibrant, loving, go out and get them woman, but she's been shackled in this environment.
That's very important. When we see someone suppressed, their vital energy gets suppressed.
Yeah.
For a while, they'll often fight against it, but then they'll surrender to it. And in surrendering to it, a part of them dies.
Yes. Well, she died. And that put it all together, made me think that this isn't the way I'm going to go. I'm not going to outwardly rebel, but as soon as I have freedom for me was getting on the 253 bus to Camden and going to the English Folk Dance Song Society for a concert, which like for my parents, like, wow, like, what are you doing? And from that day on, I was just determined, or from that period on, I was determined to follow my heart as best I could.
And I think that's a very powerful thing to do. And I think suicide, obviously, suicide is a theme in my book from which the title of this series comes. And my daughter took her own life, and so I see suicide as something that's just interesting. I've just been out for a walk with a friend this morning. We've been talking about suicide as well, and I think suicide is something that happens when the balance of the mind is so disturbed that they're no longer able to keep touch with what we see as reality. And it must have been very shocking for you. How old were you when your mother died?
Well, I was 24, and indeed it wasn't shocking because during that period, and then we come to the next point of my maturity, if you like, is that I went to Manchester University, and bizarrely, and this is the first of many, many, many kind of magic-y things happened. Bizarrely, I went to the Jewish place called Hillel House, which is a place where Jewish students congregated. And the rabbi there was a guy called Alan Unterman, and his father was my rabbi in Stamford Hill. And bizarrely, his father had told him to look out for Stephen Kirk, which is he, and to look after him. He knew about my mother's episode, and there was a teacher of transcendental meditation in town who was Jewish, very important. And he had invited her to Hillel House to teach his students. And he said to me, I don't want you to go the same way as your mother. So I think you should learn transcendental meditation. And I thought, wow. And I told my parents, and what could they say? Because it was the rabbi who had suggested it. I learned that, and we were so impressed. I was so impressed with it that my ex and I went on a 4-month teacher training course after we left university. And on the teacher training course, my mother committed suicide. Well, at that moment, I was doing 6 hours a day of meditation. And so, and I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but what that did is it made me completely disconnected from the old world.
There's a difference between disconnected and sort of disembodied, and also able to step away from a situation and not get caught in the drama of it. And what I'm hearing is if you were doing 6 hours meditation a day, probably a big part of you would have been not caught in the drama of your mother's. Whereas I've seen people, when Melissa died, I went to a support group for people who were bereaved by suicide. And some of the people in that group were unable to speak. They were so desperately caught in the drama. They were so freaked out by the suicide that happened around them. But you somehow coped with that, and you were given some tools to cope with that. And I think that's what's quite interesting is that the tools seem to come our way almost uninvited.
Absolutely.
So the tool came your way from someone who would have been very acceptable to your parents, a rabbi.
Yeah.
And so you had a tool, and we build resources in our lives.
Yeah. Yes. So should I continue?
Yeah, please do. Yes.
Anyway, after that experience, I'd resigned my job, and again, in what is a sequence of very odd, magical, positive things, I needed some work. And I went to see a headhunter, and he asked me, and this is where we get to the possible intelligence aspect of it. He asked me what I'd like to do. I had a computer science degree, and I made something up completely randomly. I'd like to be in TV, computers, and travel and live abroad. That's what I told him. And in those days, there were no computers like we use today. He'd written down a job as I walked in, and he said, "My God, I can't believe I'm hearing this. I have the job for you. Go around the corner and meet my associate, George Bormer, in Lincoln's Inn Fields." Long story short, I was offered a job at £30,000 a year. We were talking about 1980. And it was working for a company called Aragon. Aragon had the rights to some software called ViewData, which is was actually the forerunner of the internet. And he said, "I'd like you to live with my then ex-wife in Amsterdam, and we'll pay for a flat." And my job was based in British embassies. And it was how it would work is the ambassador of the British embassy, wherever I happened to be wanting to set up a meeting, would offer a cocktail party. And he would invite news agencies to come, and I would sell them. I was very good at it. I don't know. I mean, I actually have apparently have a very good sales capability. I'd never done anything like this before. And I put systems into things like the Italian state news agency. Anyway, it turned out many years later, through a series of odd coincidences, that I happened to be, had a guy assigned to me he was out of Oxford, and he was very bright. He was a guy called Bernard. And I was talking many, many years later to one of the sons of John le Carré, who was the famous writer of spy novels. And I happened to mention this guy. And one of John le Carré's sons, a guy called Stephen Cornwall, as I was relating what I'm telling you now, he said, "Oh, wait a minute. Was Bernard the son of Peter?" And I'm not saying the second name because I don't think it's possible.
Yeah.
And I said, "I have no idea." He said, "Well, if he's the son of Peter, he'll be the model for Smiley." Peter was the model for Smiley in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And certainly Bernard would have been aware of the espionage aspect. Consequently, putting two and two together, I kind of reckon that putting for the first time, two-way computer systems, because the internet didn't exist, into the Italian State News Agency and other agencies was a way that that the information could be tapped by the company. And that's a theory. But that's oh, and then there's one other odd thing which I've never worked out, is on the first week that we're in we had an Amsterdam apartment that we got over a bank holiday. And my ex and I went for a walk. When we came back, the landlord said, "Oh, someone's called for you." Well, no one knew where we were. I mean, no, I hadn't told the company, nothing. And I said, "Well, like, who was it?" He said, "Oh, just tell him the Englishman called." And that was it. I've never to this day worked out who that was, how that happened. And he asked for me by name. So, odd things happen.
And then I think a lot of still, because you ended up working alongside Rupert Murdoch at one point, and that's quite fascinating. How did that happen? What happened there?
I never would have said I worked alongside Rupert Murdoch.
Word for your company was incorporated in Rupert Murdoch's empire.
Yes, well, moving forward, I set up a couple of companies. One was a cable TV franchise with no experience. I didn't know what I was doing, but somehow we managed to set up a cable TV franchise. I got the whole thing started. But then that wasn't very interesting. So I also started TV phone-ins. When you vote in TV shows, that before my company didn't exist. So I thought I worked out a way to do it. And we completely cleaned up at the beginning. But then as time went on, we got more competitors. And I realized that I'm pretty good at working out how things might work out. But I realized as our margins minimized and as our staff had to grow, that we were in trouble. We would be in trouble. And I had to sell the business. And we I didn't have any clue. I'd never, I mean, I'd never done a day's business trading. I could just about read a balance sheet. So this was entirely kind of like, we're going to trouble. I had a huge mortgage, which I'd taken out huge debt to put into the business. But I realized I had to sell the business. So I did what's called a yagya. And a yagya is, I paid a group of pundits in India to chant for me, which is the sort of thing everybody would do, isn't it? And they kind of, you give them a kind of idea of what you want to do, and it was to sell my business. Anyway, the day that started, I had 10 days of this chanting. The day it started, I drove to work that day, and we were about to launch a huge competition for the Daily Mirror to give away a car you phoned in and you entered the competition. It had never been done before. But that morning, the night watchman had told me that a van had driven into the forecourt and was tinkering around with the computer wires outside at 5 a.m. And when I got to the office, the whole computer system had collapsed. And the Daily Mirror on the phone, and the contract was worth £3 million. And they were saying, what on earth has happened? No one can get through. We're going to cancel our contract. This is on the first day of the Yagya where I'm supposed to sell my business. So everybody's rushing around trying to fix this thing, of course. So I said to my secretary, we had an open plan office. I decided to sit under the desk of my desk, and I asked to bring me a cup of tea. And I said, I don't want to be disturbed. I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm just going to sit here cross-legged with a cup of tea, and something will happen. I don't know what. I'll think of something. And she brings me a cup of tea, and about 20 minutes later, I'm just sitting there staring into space. And she comes with the phone and she says, I know you said you don't want to be disturbed, but you think you should take this call. Oh, what is it? And it was a guy called Michael Hoy, who was the managing editor of the Times newspaper. And we did a service, racing results, very tiny contract. And he said, do you want to sell your business? And I said, I guess, why? And the long and the short of it is he introduced me to a guy who'd been sent over to the UK to look for people that might help the development of News Corporation, which is Murdoch's company. Long and the short of it, this guy called John Evans was the intermediary. He'd come over especially to find people, apparently, who he thought would know the future and help the corporation. And John Evans, after we had a meeting, phones me up and said, do you want to meet Rupert Murdoch tomorrow? What are you doing? And I said, I'm taking my car over for servicing. And I thought, that's probably not the best reply, but I'd made it. So I said, I'm sure I'll sort it out. Anyway, I met him and we did a deal on Monday. We'd exchanged contracts on Thursday. And it was, I mean, it sat up with, obviously, was extraordinary. But I actually had to persuade some shares. One of the shareholders had to take a loss on their investment. And I promised to make it up to them. So they didn't make a loss, they just covered their cost. So that was a bit of a negotiation. But by Thursday, I basically was an employee of News International, which is Murdoch's UK company. So that's how I got that.
And you also worked with Elizabeth Murdoch in one of her organisations.
Well, later on, through this business and the connection to news, I met Elizabeth's first husband, Elkin, who is my friend to this day. And he arranged for us to meet socially, he and his wife, Elizabeth, socially for dinner. Then we get on to, which is related to the answer to your story. I had colon cancer shortly after, 10 years after I'd sold the business, in fact. At that point, I thought I'd lost the plot, actually. I'd become like all the other executives and put money and status in front of my core values, and I'd lost it. And okay, so I just put in the little thing about, so, and I still didn't believe in traditional medicine. I used to go and have Ayurvedic treatment. I still have Ayurvedic treatment, which is the Indian health system. And I'd gone to I actually had gone to 3 GPs who told me there was nothing wrong with me. And I then went to a place in Germany where there were 3 top Ayurvedic doctors. They took my pulse and they said, nothing wrong with you, imbalance. And then I sat down for dinner, and the place was shared by a convention of witches. And that's one, doesn't I? I had no idea, but it didn't matter. And I'm sitting at dinner on my own, and this woman comes up, sits opposite me, and says, "You are very ill. You need to get help now. You will be better if you get help now. If you don't, then you'll die." And walked off. So I went to another doctor, and basically they diagnosed colon cancer. And then I had basically 2 years of treatment, a major operation. And during that period, I resigned from News International. And I have to say that despite all the things people say about Murdoch, they sent me a message saying, if you leave the company, well, fine. If you stay and you die, we'll look after your family for the rest of their lives. So in my heart, now I was thinking, I'm in this place in hospital because I didn't follow my heart, and I should have known. I knew I was ill, actually, and I avoided thinking about it. And I thought, okay, I'm going back to basics. So I said, I have to resign. I resigned. And then Elizabeth Murdoch and I were having lunch, as we did many times, like once every few months we'd have lunch. And I said to her, I've resigned. I don't know what I'm going to do now. And she said, I'm setting up my television production company, Shine. Would you like to be on the board? And again, it's like, what? I mean, I didn't know anything about television production or anything. I mean, really. I still didn't know anything about business, full stop. But I accepted that position, and that's basically how I got to know her.
That's pretty amazing. And also the amount of synchronicities in your life, the thing like the witch coming to your table, that's not an everyday story that you see in Coronation Street, for example. It's quite rare that actually something comes along and goes, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
But it feels like there's been guidance for you. And so there you were, a sort of someone who had suffered with 2 years of treatment with a very, very pervasive illness. And then you went to a meditation retreat after that. But it was a meditation retreat you went to after that?
Yeah, that's where I met my Louisa, my wife.
And sorry, excuse me. You've been together with her for more than 20 years.
Yes.
And you were married at the time, and but something in you was not met, was not satisfied. And you're not exactly going to be a sort of like a babe magnet, having had your colon sort of ripped apart and being, I think you said you were 6 stone at the time. But somehow, again, synchronicity came your way, and you found the woman who, and I've seen you guys together, and it's a very beautiful relationship. Yeah. And what happened there?
Well, to be clear, I had no intention whatsoever of finishing my marriage, and my ex is a wonderful person, but I wasn't thinking about it. I'd gone to the water filter in the meditation retreat, and there was Louisa. Now, I had met Louisa when I was beginning of my illness, before I knew I was ill, and on another retreat, and she was there. We had a nice conversation, and then she left without saying goodbye, and I felt sad that she hadn't said goodbye. But I had no idea who she was, how to contact her, so I never would have followed up anyway, probably. So anyway, so I knew her. Went to the water filter, and she's standing there, and I'm standing there, and I know you. And it just developed from that. I mean, nothing happened on the meditation retreat, but we would go, we were there a week together, and we go for walks, and I drove her to the station. And when she was leaving, I felt, my God, why are you leaving? It's like, this is extraordinary. And a few weeks later, when I finished the retreat, we met, and she told me she'd fallen in love with me. And like, wow, I really wasn't expecting that. I thought I felt for her, but I thought I just wasn't in a place where I wanted yet another drama of ending my marriage. And so it took us 3 years to work it out, actually, before we got together formally, because I felt very bad about leaving a perfectly nice woman in the circumstances. But anyway, we got together. Here we are.
And your life has been transformed by your relationship with Louisa. You feel like you have people often get married, and they often get married to avoid loneliness, or because that's the done thing to do. And to be on the same wavelength as another person is quite rare, and to develop together. So something's happened for you in that second marriage that you've got, where it feels like it's rock solid and sort of quite different. And I really hear you that your first wife was a lovely woman, and but something happened for you. And what would you say that is, Stephen?
Well, in my old relationship, my ex and I hardly did anything together, which is how she wanted it. And I used to, in the mornings, go for a walk on my own to Stamford Hill and back, and I had friends. But I really wanted a relationship. I didn't know this, by the way, at the time.
No, of course.
I really wanted to have a relationship where me and whoever I was with would do most things together. And magically, both Louisa and I love the same things. So we spend 90% of our time traveling around the world. She likes traveling to anywhere where we're not more than I do, but I live with that. So we've been to virtually every place on the planet, and the ones that we haven't been to, she still wants to go. Also, at the same time, I didn't want to go back to formal work when we met. I had a number of non-executive directorships, and I was doing some coaching, but I never wanted to go back to a full-time job. And as our relationships gone on, I've got less and less interested in that sort of work, and I become quite reclusive. I mean, people ask me now about what I'm like. I say I'm a recluse, because the last 3 or 4 years, as you know, have been extremely challenging, and I'm just hiding in a way from the mainstream of what's going on in the world, while I watch as if it's a TV drama what's happening now.
Yeah.
And Louisa's the same.
And we've had conversations before about purpose, and it's one of the chapters in my book, Slay Your Dragons, is finding your purpose. And you said something quite interesting there, that you said you felt that Louisa was your purpose.
Yes.
And I think that's actually that's quite profound as well, because to really embrace another human being wholeheartedly. I remember reading Rainer Maria Rilke, the German philosopher, who said, if in your lifetime you can truly love one other human being, you've achieved a great deal.
Yeah.
And so, yes, you have actually cracked that purpose.
Yeah.
And I think the challenge for you, as I see it, and this is the challenge I'm presenting to you now as well, is what apart from that does your heart cry out for you to do? Because you've led a very rich and varied life, full of magic and synchronicity and all sorts of stuff like that. And now you say that you're a recluse, but you're a very much a people person, as we've discovered as well. Yeah. And I'm just wondering what your life is beckoning you to take on now.
Well, you see, all this words about beckoning and so on and so forth don't relate to me. I'm very happy. But what I do is I play my guitar, and what I'm doing is also writing a novel of short stories. But I used to be driven, you know, money and success and feeding the kids when I was younger. But unlike the majority of people I meet, I don't have a burning desire to do anything, to get anywhere. I'm very happy. I'm looking at the sun outside. I'm thinking, wow, first time I've seen sun in the morning for a few months. That's amazing. And I just go for walks and stuff. I mean, so there's nothing what I'd like to do most is be able to play my guitar to a degree where I could perform in public. I don't particularly want to perform, but I'd like to be able to perform. And I feel that I was a musician in a past life. And for whatever reason, this life, I've stunted musicianship. In other words, after 50 years of playing the guitar, I can hardly play anything. And my passion is music. I'm going to have a passion. And now I'm trying as best I can to be able to perform adequately to my.
So one of the things that I tend to ask my guests on this podcast is, what's the dragon you've had to slay in order to become who you are? What have you had to take on and grapple with in order to become who you are?
Be different.
Being different.
Always be different. Not for the sake of being different, but it turns out the me is different. And I don't believe in well, basically, I'm on a project now to drop as many beliefs as I possibly can. And this has been a lifelong thing, which is that when I find myself believing something, I think, uh-oh. And it started off with religion, dropping religion. And now I'm kind of, whenever I find myself being certain about something, I think, uh-oh, it's a belief. And I think personally that the problem with humans are belief systems, and it has caused and is causing the majority of conflicts between people, between nations. And I think there is a lack of people following their heart and saying to themselves, do I really believe that? Really, do I really believe that? And I think if more people did that, the world would be a more peaceful and a better place. If that answers your question.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think what you're saying is that actually that each of us can play our individual role in that. We are all, as Sir George Trevelyan used to say, droplets of divinity. And so each droplet has its role to play. Mm-hmm. And you seem to have found quite a lot of peace in doing and being what you are now. And you know, still with some draws towards music, towards writing, but still with some draws that actually help you as well. And health-wise, are you fully recovered from?
Well, it's 20 odd years now. Yes, I have to have checkups every 5 years. I'm fine, thank you very much.
If I can just ask you before we close, what did that do for you, being that seriously ill and having to take on the amount of treatments that you had, and how did you get through that?
Funnily enough, and I don't really understand why, I was at peace doing this. Once we started, I had an excellent surgeon who I'm in contact with to this day, and there was something peaceful because I knew now that nature was taking over. That I'm now doing, okay, I put off doing the right thing. And if I didn't stop doing what I was doing, I would probably be dead. But the message was, Stephen, you've gone off track, stop it, come back. And then the worst moment when I was in pain and it was a very difficult evening, was when I was in intensive care in an emergency room, having just had the operation. And it was a dreadful evening. The odd thing about hospitals is that when in this particular hospital, every time somebody had a problem, they'd turn on the alarm and every room would ring. So I had a night where every few seconds the alarms would go off in the room, in my room. I thought, this is so bizarre. Here am I needing a rest, and every time somebody else has an emergency, I have to be aware. Anyway, I said to the universe, I made a promise that from that day on I'd follow my heart. And I've tried my best to do that since.
That's very interesting. I had something similar when my daughter Melissa was born. That she was born through cesarean in the end, and I sort of like I held her in my arms and I started to well up with tears, and there were all these strangers in the room, and I stopped myself and I made a vow at that moment that I wouldn't stop myself feeling again, and I've kept that up. And it's like, so I'm hearing that you've had a very similar experience, and that actually you're following your heart. And it must have been very tempting to stay within News International and to be looked after, you know, to have your family looked after if anything happened to you, and you'd have had security, but actually something else called you. I know you don't like beckoning or calling, but I think there's something that goes with that as well.
No, there was no question. It was a complete non-starter, me staying.
Yeah.
And I knew that one could take that approach for the look after my family. But on the other hand, we had sufficient funds that I'd made by then that I thought, well, actually, they'll be okay.
Yeah.
And it's not worth, if they knew that I thought that by staying there, it would harm my health, they wouldn't want me to stay there anyway. And there was no question, actually, my ex was fine. Well, we all thought that was an amazing gesture.
Amazing gesture, yes, yes.
I didn't want to do that.
Yeah. Stephen, thank you very, very much. I really appreciate you coming on to our show here and to add your particular wisdom. And I do see that actually you are very much embodying what you're speaking about. There is a peacefulness and a calmness about you, and an enthusiasm for life as well. So thank you very much for being here, and see you down the trail.
Thank you very much. I'm honoured that you should choose me.
Yeah, lovely. Thanks, Stephen. All the best.